Now, for more on China's poverty reduction efforts, I'm joined live from Beijing by Li Xin, Managing Director of Caixin Global. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good evening. Good to be here.
Now, China has already lifted 700 million people out of poverty over the last 40 years. So what have been the most effective measures in China's poverty alleviation efforts?
I think there are two main reasons. One is pretty straightforward: growth. When you have uninterrupted high-speed growth in the last 40 years and moving people's, let me say, the GDP per capita moving from $300 to last year probably $7,000, and then you basically take a lot of people with you out of poverty. And come along with that is infrastructure and a lot of spending on that. And the second component of that, I think, it's service. The basic service provided to the rural area, including healthcare, including allowance, including universal education. All this helped tremendously.
And in terms of giving people more financial independence, tell us about the strategy of targeted poverty alleviation and the impact that's having.
I think it's a very, very smart policy, because as China has been working on poverty alleviation for many decades, the low-hanging fruits are gone. And if China wants to achieve its goal to eliminate poverty by the year of 2020, that's a very high call. That basically translating to 1 million people every month. So in order to do that, you have to be very, very specific, addressing exactly the cause of the poverty. Is that because of the remote area? Then we need relocation. Is that because of lack of skills? Then we need training. Is that because people are temporarily incapable to work? Then we have to find out the cause and address that. So I think it's a very smart policy, but it takes a lot of effort to actually implement that.
And speaking of implementing, sometimes there can be an issue with making sure that the resources get to the right people. So what's being done to curb corruption in how the funds for poverty reduction is allocated and used?
I think the corruption in poverty alleviation is like corruption everywhere. The recipe is simple and straightforward: transparency, transparency, transparency. The government needs to open its book, open basically showing people what the programs are, where the money is flowing into, so people can exert scrutiny, people and media and the general public, and basically the entire society can be on the government side to help to make sure the money goes to the right people.
And what are some of the differences in the roles of the central government versus, say, the local governments in how they really implement these poverty reduction initiatives?
That's an interesting question, because once people think about China, they think, oh, government, and they think government is the same. But actually, central government and local government have a very clear division of job on this. So the central government will set the goal, and basically that's the very high, the very core toll we talked about. And they will also promote the best practice and provide the bulk of the funding. But the local government needs to get the job done. So they are the ones actually implementing that. They need to find out where the poverties do exist today, and find out the exact cause of it and address that and make sure that's cured in a sustainable way and not just in a campaign. And have mentioned that the government, I think we shouldn't forget the force of the market, which is also very, very powerful in moving China away from poverty, in moving our Chinese people away from poverty. For instance, Caixin unveiled the Poverty Alleviation Index that's encouraging companies to incorporate poverty alleviation in the portfolio to have social impact in that. And you have a lot of fintech companies providing financial service to the poverty-stricken areas. So the market can play a role in that as well.
Now, as we've mentioned, China does have this very ambitious goal of eliminating poverty by 2020. And then you also have the added pressure of doing it in a sustainable, environmentally friendly way. And we know that China's economy is slowing down as it transforms. So what do you see as the biggest challenges to poverty reduction?
I think the biggest challenges, they are the more obvious ones and the less obvious ones. The most obvious one, like we mentioned, is because the low-hanging fruits are gone. So the next stage of poverty alleviation has to be very targeted, very focused, and addressing the fundamental cause of that, and that is basically to have a sustainable model of development for very specific areas. And the less obvious ones is, you said Chinese economy is slowing down, but on the other hand, that's just because China is moving up the value chain. So most of the jobs will actually go into the more capital-intensive, more knowledge-intensive areas. They're higher-paid jobs, but they are also jobs that require more skills. And this will be actually the challenge for people who just move out of poverty because they might not get the best training. So that, I think, will be a challenge, that to provide the skills and provide the knowledge that they will need to survive in the new century. And also there is, last but not least, the left behind problem. I think the migration come along with China's industrialization, provide jobs to hundreds of millions of people. But at the same time, a lot of children and older people were left behind. So providing public service to them, especially health care and also education, is essentially important.
Well, thank you so much for your insights, Li Xin, Managing Director of Caixin Global.